It's more than ironic that in the workplace, we don't talk about communication. Well, some people specialize in that area. Jill McPherson was a teacher for 25 years, and she specializes in nonviolent communication as a peaceful communication strategist. And she'll join us right after this word from our sponsor.
The Just Word podcast is brought to you by Just Wealth Financial. Money Sense magazine ranks Just Wealth as the best robo-advisor in Canada in 2024. And the Globe and Mail says that for the third straight year, Just Wealth had the highest 5-year after-fee annualized total returns for the growth portfolio. Just Wealth, investing the way it should be, just for you.
Jill, a real pleasure to meet you.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Jill, what is nonviolent communication?
Well, I call it a school of thought that was founded by a gentleman named Marshall Rosenberg, who coined it the language of life. It's an idea that when we use communication that helps us to make connection instead of disconnection, we can collectively help each other and support each other in getting our needs met rather than fighting and sort of scrounging with a frame of scarcity, but instead with a frame of abundance.
Okay. You mentioned something interesting there, unmet need. What is an unmet need within the context of the workplace?
Yeah. So when we go to work, we all have tasks we need to complete. And if things aren't going the way we would like, we might have some painful emotion. And Marshall taught us that those painful emotions were like flags waving to say, look at this, there's an unmet need. And he provided in his book, Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life, he provided a list of what he believed are universal human needs. And so in the context of work or home or in any area of our life, we are vulnerable to having unmet needs. And so, but in a specific example of in the workplace, there might be a scenario where you need autonomy, where you need trust, you have a need for independence. In another scenario, there might be a need for collaboration and clarity. There might be a need for challenge and stimulation. And so when we have these needs, we all have these collective needs, but at times some need might not be being met depending on our personality. Some people, for instance, might really thrive with a group kind of scenario, and other people thrive more working independently. This is just one example that could come up at the workplace. And so if our needs aren't being met, then there can be a lot of stress, anxiety, some sort of painful emotion will start showing itself. And often we ignore this and have it kind of suck it up and, carry on. We're supposed to ignore those emotions and just get the job done.
The thing is, Jill, typically in a workplace, it's hierarchical. There's a boss.
Yes, yeah, for sure. That's very common in education, in the workplace, that we have these levels of a position, and the higher up you go, tend to be the more power you have over other people. And for the most part, because we don't really know anything else, we accept it as normal, and we don't, think it could be any other way. But until NVC training, I didn't know it in any other way too. Marshall talked about our societies as domination societies, where we create a certain language that keeps people in a position of power powerful, and the people with less power less powerful. So language is very unknowingly used for control. I mean, some people would be very aware of how they use their language to control a situation, particularly if you're in sales, for example. But for the most part, we don't realize how a lot of the things we're saying or doing are creating, suffering for others at a cost to somebody else for us to get our needs met. So domination societies often, and hierarchical societies tend to have certain beliefs that we all kind of live by, either unknowingly or knowingly. Like, for instance, demanding respect simply because of your position. There's a huge value of right and wrong. There's a tendency to blame. And a lot of victim mentality, like, when my boss said that, it really hurt my feelings. Using language to control, using guilt and shame to disempower, using generalizations about, say, a type of, those people or that group, or an ethnic group. A lot lack of empathy. One thing we know in nonviolent communication is where there is a lot of rules, it tends to be an environment where there's less empathy. Where there's abundance of empathy, rules are not required. And so domination culture really educates us in ways to make violence not only acceptable, but in some cases almost enjoyable.
Wow. Okay. Let's paint a scenario that we can work with. For instance, if I have a bad boss, how do I deal with that bad boss to get them on a more, I guess, nonviolent or level playing field? It would be another way to put it, I suppose.
Right. Okay. So first of all, even the language bad boss. So there we are in judgment. So if I can just give a little bit more explanation with nonviolent communication, Marshall had like four kind of critical, I'm going to call them steps. The first is observation. So he invited us to shift our minds out of judgment and into observation. So even saying a bad boss is judgment. So instead, we're going to say things, observation of, like, when my boss continually expects, schedules meetings, every Friday, I feel so frustrated and, blah, blah, blah. Right. So there's a frustration. So you're sharing the observable thing about the boss that you're not enjoying. And this reframe to observation invites us to create some distance and space of, like, I'm going to now observe my boss like I'm watching a movie rather than being in the movie.
Ah,
And just creating that space is the first thing to kind of protect us, because we've all heard that expression, don't take it personally, but nobody really teaches us how to not take it personally. So I guide people in helping them through the steps of what that means to not take it personally. And step number one is to reframe the mind. Instead of saying your boss is bad, or he thinks, or he's such a, now we're going to disengage from that judgment. We're going to step back and we're going to just observe. Just tell me, like you're watching a movie, what is it that your boss says or does that creates these comfortable feelings? What are you feeling when he or she does this?
so
And
it's not so much a function of trying to change the boss as it is with dealing with whatever actions that they do, including working on Fridays late in the
right,
afternoon.
right. Yes, and absolutely, because if we were trying to change the boss, then that would be violent in nonviolent communication.
Right.
Right? So our goal is actually to release any need to control anybody else, because this is about self-empowerment. And the good news is, though, when we change and shift ourselves, our world changes around us, and people are very influenced by us. Just like you can imagine, if there is a challenging boss, it changes the whole tone of the office. A new boss comes in and that's completely different. Now that, again, the tone of the office changes. So as we change, no matter what position we are at the workplace, we can have a very positive or a very painful or negative experience on the whole work environment. So when we step back and start witnessing the boss like a movie.
Whoa, 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 Joe. So then you're saying before you do the observation, you take a step back and look at yourself.
Yes, because the thing about feelings is they're a trigger for us to let us know there's an unmet need. And the problem is, because we haven't been trained to do that, our reflex mode, our sort of default setting for most people is, I'm annoyed, I'm agitated. Okay, we look outward. Who do we blame? Well, it's the boss. It's the boss who's making us work late on a Friday. It's his fault that I'm upset, or it's her fault that I'm upset. And instead, when we have a painful emotion, it's taking that deep breath and going, okay, what need of mine's not being met? And my experience is, oh, I've been doing this for 8 years now. It still can be quite challenging for me to sort of self empathize. So I find safe people to share what's going on for me so that they can just reflect back. Okay, so, this is what I'm hearing you say, so that I can figure out, okay, what's really going on for me. And it's sort of like, without getting into too many more details than that, I'll just give the analogy of, it's like if you've been wounded, before you, there's something else in the, somebody else that's wounded, like they always say, if you're in the airplane, to always put your mask on first before you help your child. Sort of the same idea. You need to get grounded and clear sort of your lens, get clear perspective if you want to free yourself of this agitation that you believe is the cause, that the boss is the cause. But actually, the boss and the meeting, Friday meeting, is actually a trigger, not the cause. And
Okay, so
so,
we go through the self-assessment. We do the observation about whether the boss is doing this intentionally or not, I suppose, or something along those lines. Then what?
okay, yeah. So we're not even, we're not even going to go there yet. We're just going to notice the boss and not take it personally. That the step back is not taking it personally. And then that there's self-care. Then the next, once you're kind of in that grounded self-care, you're taking care of your needs. Now you can start to get compassionately curious over what need is the boss not getting met by using this strategy. So Marshall would always say that we're always in a position of using strategies to get needs met. So this Friday meeting is a strategy for the boss, for the boss to meet a need. And so what need is this boss trying to get met? And so having that compassionate curiosity, again, helps us to cut the cord and disconnect a bit more in this not taking it personally, instead of just labeling somebody who's not very thoughtful or selfish, or what other judgment words that come up. So you can stay angry at your boss and blame them, or you can discover what's true for you and what you might empathize is happening for them.
So you're self-aware, you've observed the boss. It sounds to me is almost as though you're trying to build a compassion for the boss. The boss has a report due on Monday, and that's why he always has, meetings on Fridays.
Exactly. It's empathy and compassion that frees ourselves from conflict. So conflict only happens at the level of strategy. So for instance, boss wants to have a Friday afternoon meeting. I don't. And so now we're fighting over strategy. Any conflict in the world, whether we're talking about a personal relationship, a work relationship, or a political war, is all about people trying to meet their needs through a strategy. And we only war can happen, war, conflict, I'm using those words in a generalization, can only happen at the level of strategy. When we disengage from like deciding who's right and who's wrong and whose strategy is going to win, and we get curious over what need is this strategy trying to get met for the person who's enforcing it. Now, if we meet them at the level of need, so you kind of alluded to a guess there with like, maybe the Friday afternoon meeting is because there's something due Monday and that has to be in, or else, the money's not going to come. There can be, so there's a need for certainty, for predictability, for clarity, so I need this meeting before we leave to know everything's in place that needs to happen for Monday. And meanwhile, I could, once I can empathize with that and connect to the need, and I can share my need. And once we've heard each other's needs, it's incredible how the strategy will show itself, where we don't have to now fight over Friday meeting or no Friday meeting. Instead, we can say, here's my need. I have a need for some independence. I have some need for trust. And this constant checking in every Friday is making me feel, like you don't think I'm competent, so I have a need for competency and we share what's really happening for us, and then and suddenly strategies will start to show that will meet both people's needs.
Yeah, so I guess the end stage is talking about it.
Yes, yes, and here's the thing. We unfortunately, and as a teacher I can say this, in institutional education we have not educated our children to how to hear the other person's pain or discomfort, or something that's bothering them, without taking it personally. So we often get triggered by someone else's pain. So if you're my boss and I come to you and say, I'm really struggling with these Friday meetings, you will likely hear me saying there's something wrong with you. You're a bad boss because you have Friday meetings. And now you're defensive. And now you're going to argue why these Friday meetings are required and necessary. And, and I'm the boss and, the buck stops here. And instead of getting curious over why is it that I'm struggling with this Friday meetings and what needs not working for me, and then being able to, once you hear me, then being able to share, what's happening for you. One of the tips that I've often thought of that Marsha Rosenberg said is nobody can hear you until they have felt heard. But we spend a lot of time using loud voices and quote unquote violent strategies to get heard, when the first step we always need to do if we want to be heard is hear the other.
Yeah, but that can be a one-way street, not to throw a fly in the ointment, because you may be listening and you may have empathy for your boss, but your boss might not have any empathy for you.
Right. And so the great news is that when we try these strategies, and it does require, personal growth. I had my cousin reach out to me after the last podcast I was on, and she said, I loved it. She said, but Jill, I'm guessing you had to do some personal work in order to be able to speak this nonviolent language. And I said, absolutely. I had a lot of paradigms to declutter, a lot of painful cultural beliefs to declutter. And one is that there's a lot of people stuck in jobs that they're very not enjoying, but they have a belief that this is just the way it is, that a boss is to inflict pain, and that's sort of like their privilege of power. And if you don't like it, well, you try to be the boss, and then you get to do that. So if you try these strategies and you find you're still not making connection, then your feelings are guiding you and telling you that this may not be where you can be of best of service in your life. So is this, if you're dying for independence and trust and even some leadership, and your boss is not able to provide that, then where do you need to go to meet that need? And stop, banging your head against the same wall, hoping for different results.
Yeah, you've gone back to the self-empathy. You've gone
Yes.
back to, if I don't like what I'm doing, assess myself and move to something different.
Right. And that could be it, but be open to, I've had a wise spiritual teacher that always said to me, what are your feelings trying to tell you? And I remember before I met him, I sought him out because I thought he was going to help me to not be mad, to not be sad around things, stress in the workplace or otherwise. And he invited me instead to stop, trying to shut up the emotion. I'm supposed to stop and listen. He would say, what is your anger trying to tell you?
Mm.
And unfortunately, we tend to be raised in domination cultures where emotion is shamed, is discredited. I was recently in conversation with a lawyer who teaches law, and she said, in the law world, emotion is considered the enemy because only logic and reason can reside in law. So, and which is tragic for me because I think of how more effective our legal system would be if emotion could be incorporated, emotion and compassion could be incorporated into our judicial system. So unfortunately, because we don't know we haven't been trained on how to handle or support our own emotions, other people's emotions, it can be challenging, and people would rather just say, no emotions here.
Jill McPherson. She's a peaceful communication strategist. Oh, Jill, I should have asked you, how do people reach you, or how do you get in touch with people?
Right. Okay. Well, I have a website called, can we start that again?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
5, 4.
Is it
Jill
okay
McPherson. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, is it okay if I say a little of the testimonial and then say how to get a hold of me?
Yeah, sure.
Or would you
Sure.
rather?
Yep, that's fine.
Which?
Yep.
Okay.
Jill McPherson. She's a peaceful communication strategist. Oh, Jill, I should have asked you, how do people get in touch with you?
Well, first of all, before I tell you that, I want to just share a quick little testimonial here from my previous business client. who just sent me these words and wanted to share that he had a difficult situation. Works in the financial services. He had a difficult situation with a business partner. The relationship broke down. It was between him and a family friend, which we know there's lots of businesses out there that involve family members. And the management and the business broke down. And that I was able to help him with, he called vent sessions, but I'm going to call them empathy sessions, role playing and acting out as a objective third party to build and strengthen communication skills and emotionally and navigate future difficult situations. So if anybody listening is interested in some support around their workplace scenario, then they can get a hold of me at jillmcpherson.com. That's Jill and then McPherson.com. I also do video reels on social media. So you can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I have some previous TV shows on my YouTube channel as well, that when I was doing some TV shows. But otherwise, following my little reels on social media, I give communication tips, not only for the work environment, but for home and personal romantic relationships as well.
Good. Thanks again, Jill.
Thank you.